My husband doesn't know I make more than him. Not really. He knows my title, Senior Director of Corporate Strategy, and he knows we live comfortably, but he's never asked to see my pay stubs, and I've never volunteered them. It's not a secret exactly. It's just that money was never the thing that defined us. When we got married 6 years ago, he was the one with the steady job at a consulting firm, and I was the one grinding through MBA loans. The dynamic shifted somewhere around year 3. Quietly. The way most real changes happen. By the time my base salary crossed $300,000 plus bonus plus equity, we'd already settled into the kind of life where neither of us cared about who picked up the check. My name is Coralie. I grew up in a town in eastern Pennsylvania where the biggest building was the grain elevator, and my mother taught 4th grade for 31 years. I learned early that the loudest person in the room is almost never the most powerful one, because the powerful ones don't need to prove anything. My mother used to say that about her principal, a tiny woman named Mrs. Hagan, who could silence a faculty meeting with one raised eyebrow. I have spent 20 years trying to be Mrs. Hagan. My husband's name is Wyatt. He's a project manager at a mid-size architecture firm in Boston. He makes good money, not great money, and he's never been jealous of mine. What he has been for the entire 6 years of our marriage is afraid of his older sister. Her name is Verity, and the first thing you need to know about her is that she did not come to our wedding. She had a reason. She always has a reason. The reason in 2019 was that her firm had sent her to Singapore for a quarterly review, and she couldn't, in good conscience, fly back for what she called, in an email I have never deleted, a small ceremony. She sent us a card. The card had a check inside for $200. Wyatt cried when he opened it, which is a thing my husband does maybe once every 3 years, and I held him on the kitchen floor of our first apartment and told him it didn't matter. I lied, obviously. It mattered enormously, but the lie was for him, not for her, and I have never regretted telling it. After that, Verity became a kind of distant weather system in our lives. She lived in Zurich for 2 years, then Singapore again, then back to New York for a stretch. And then a year ago, she'd taken a senior position at a private equity firm in Boston and bought what she described in a group text to the family as a discreet little place on Beacon Hill. Wyatt's mother forwarded that text to me. I think she was trying to be nice. I think she didn't realize the word discreet was doing a lot of work. And all that time, Verity and I had met exactly twice. Once at a hospital, briefly, when their father had his bypass surgery. Once at a brunch she organized for their mother's birthday, where she spent 45 minutes on her phone and then left to catch a flight. She had never been to our home. She had never asked about my work. She knew, in the broadest sense, that I was in business. She did not know what I did, and she had never tried to find out. So when Wyatt came home one Thursday in March and told me Verity had invited us to dinner at her apartment, I knew immediately that something was off. Not because the invitation was strange, it was overdue, if anything, but because of his face. "She wants to meet you properly," he said. He was loosening his tie in our bedroom doorway and not quite looking at me. "She said she felt bad about the wedding." "Did she? Coralie. What?" He sat on the edge of the bed. I was on the floor going through a box of tax documents, because that's what I do on Thursdays in March, and I remember the specific texture of the carpet against the back of my knees. He said, "She's been doing well. Really well. She's a partner now. And I think I don't know. She's in a phase." "What kind of phase?" He looked at the wall for a long time. Then he said, "She asked what you do, and I told her you were in strategy at the firm, and she laughed. She actually laughed, Coralie. And she said, 'Oh, so she's like a coordinator.' And I don't know why I didn't correct her. I just didn't." I closed the box of tax documents. I sat back on my heels. I looked at my husband, who I love more than anything in this world, who once drove 8 hours through a blizzard to be at my grandmother's funeral, who makes me coffee every single morning without being asked. And I said, "Wyatt, I know. Wyatt, I know. I know how it sounds. Tell me what you want." He didn't answer for a long time, and then he said something I've thought about a lot in the months since, because I'm not sure I'd have come up with it on my own. He said, "I don't want you to lie. I just don't want you to correct her. Not yet. I want to see what she does. I want to see who she is when she thinks she's the only successful person at the table. Because I've spent 38 years giving her the benefit of the doubt, and I am so tired, Coralie. I'm so tired of pretending she's a good person just because we share parents. I understood then that this was not a request about my career. This was a man who had been carrying something heavy for a very long time, and he was finally setting it down where I could see it. I said, okay. I said, let's go to dinner. I want to be honest about what I wore, because the comments online about these kinds of stories always fixate on the outfit, and they're right to. The outfit is the whole shape of the thing. I wore a navy sweater I'd had since business school. I wore black trousers from a mid-range department store. I wore a pair of leather flats that I polished myself the night before because they were old, but they were still good. I put my hair in a low bun. I wore no jewelry except my wedding ring, which is a thin gold band because the engagement ring Wyatt gave me is a half-carat solitaire that we picked out together when neither of us had any money, and I have never wanted a different one. I did not carry the Goyard tote my team had given me when I got promoted. I carried an old leather satchel that had been my mother's. The strap is repaired with a piece of saddle leather. It is the most beautiful object I own and the cheapest one. Wyatt looked at me when I came out of the bedroom. He didn't say anything for a second. Then he said, "You look like you." "Good," I said. "I love you. I know." We drove to Beacon Hill on a Saturday in late March. There was still snow on the ground in the shaded parts of the sidewalk, and the air had that particular sharp, wet smell that Boston gets when winter is almost over, but won't quite let go. Verity's building was 4 stories, brick, with a black painted door and a brass knocker shaped like a pineapple. She came down to let us in herself, and that should have been my first clue, because people with real money don't answer their own doors. But I was nervous, and I missed it. She was beautiful in the way that money makes a person beautiful, which is to say her skin and her hair and her teeth all looked expensive. She wore cream cashmere and dark, wide-leg pants and small gold earrings, and her perfume smelled like a hotel in a country I have not been to. She hugged Wyatt for slightly too long. She turned to me and her eyes did this little flicker. Top of my head, my sweater, my flats, my bag, and then she smiled with only the bottom half of her face and said, "Coralie." Finally, I agreed. Come up, come up. Mind the stairs, they're original to the building." There was no elevator. 4 flights. I'd worn the flats for a reason, and I was grateful. Wyatt put his hand on the small of my back on the way up, which is a thing he does when he's nervous, not when I am. Her apartment was fine. It was nice. It was a 2-bedroom on the top floor with good light and a small fireplace and the kind of furniture that costs a lot but doesn't actually feel like anyone lives there. There was a velvet sofa the color of an unripe peach. There was a coffee table made of one solid piece of stone. There was a rug from somewhere with consonants in the name, and Verity told me about the rug for almost 6 full minutes before she offered me a drink. I'm not exaggerating about the time. I checked my watch later because I wanted to remember. "It's hand-knotted," she said. "Each square inch. Well, you wouldn't believe me if I told you." "Try me," I said and smiled. She laughed. "It's just, Coralie, you're so funny." "Wyatt didn't tell me you were funny." Wyatt was at the window. He didn't turn around. We sat down. She brought me a glass of white wine that she made a small ceremony of pouring, telling me the name of the vineyard and the name of the importer and the name of the friend of hers who'd recommended it. The friend was a sommelier in Copenhagen. Of course he was. I sipped the wine. It was perfectly fine. It tasted like white wine. "So," she said, settling into the velvet sofa opposite us, "Wyatt tells me you're in office work." I felt Wyatt stiffen next to me. "That's right," I said. "That's so nice. It must be wonderful to have predictable hours. I don't, you know. I'm always on. London is calling at 6 in the morning and Hong Kong at midnight. But you must have weekends, real weekends. I do try." "And what is it that you do exactly?" I had prepared for this question. I had been preparing for it in some form for 6 years. I said, "I work in strategy for a financial services company." "Strategy," she repeated. "Like, what does that mean on a Tuesday? What do you actually do?" I took a small sip of the wine. I thought about my Tuesday. On a typical Tuesday, I run an executive meeting with 12 people, 8 of whom report to me, 3 of whom are C-suite, and one of whom is the CEO. I make decisions that move tens of millions of dollars. Last Tuesday, I had killed a project that 2 senior vice presidents had spent 18 months on, and one of them had cried, and I had held my position because I was right and the project was a sinkhole. I said, I help with planning, long-term planning. So like calendars? I heard Wyatt's hand close around his wine glass. I put my hand on his knee very lightly under the coffee table. Sometimes, I said, that's so great, Corley, honestly. Not everyone needs to be. You know, some people just want a job they can leave at the office, and there's no shame in that. None at all. I have friends like that, and they're some of the happiest people I know. That's lovely, I said. She started telling me about her apartment then. She told me the floors were original to 1847. She told me the molding had been restored by a craftsman from Florence. She told me the velvet sofa was custom, and the upholsterer had a wait list. She told me about a trip she was about to take to a private island off the coast of Greece, and she told me the name of the island. And I do not remember it because I was thinking about whether my mother had eaten dinner that night. My mother is 74 and lives alone and has a small herniated disc in her lower back, and she calls me every Saturday at 7, and I had texted her on the way over to say I'd call her tomorrow instead. Verity opened a drawer in a side table and took out a small handbag. She set it on the coffee table between us almost reverently. It was a Hermes Birkin. Not the Birkin you've heard about, not the entry-level model. This was a Himalaya, white crocodile, the kind that auctions for somewhere north of $200,000. I know what it was because one of the women on my board carries one, and I had asked her about it once at a gala, because I thought it would be a kind thing to ask. The board member had told me the wait list was years and the price was obscene, and she only carried it to other women's funerals. I wanted you to see it, Verity said. Wyatt said you liked nice things. It's beautiful, I said. It's an investment, really. Bags like this, they appreciate. People don't understand that. They look at the price and they panic. But you have to think long-term. Long-term planning, I said. She looked at me for a second. Then she laughed, a small, bright laugh, and said, Exactly, you get it. Wyatt was very still next to me. She picked up the bag and set it back in the drawer, and then she said something I will remember for the rest of my life. She said, I do worry about Wyatt sometimes. He could have done so much more. I always thought he'd end up somewhere bigger. But you can tell he's happy with the life you two have built. That little apartment, the simple things. It's sweet. I mean it. We don't live in a little apartment. We live in a 4-bedroom house in Brookline that we bought outright 2 years ago. I closed the deal myself with a wire from my own account while Wyatt was in Maine for his father's birthday. He didn't know I was buying it. It was a surprise. He cried that time, too. It is sweet, I said. And you're so down to earth, Corley. I love that. I love that he picked someone who isn't competitive. I think that's why it works. 2 ambitious people in one marriage. It's a recipe for disaster in my experience. In your experience? I said. Oh, I've seen it. Friends of mine. The wives I went to Wharton with, half of them are divorced now. They couldn't handle the dynamic. There has to be one person who, holds the home. Wyatt said very quietly. Corley holds a lot. Verity smiled at him like he was 8 years old. I'm sure she does, sweetie. I'd like to tell you that I broke then, that I stood up and said something devastating and walked out. I didn't. I sat there for another 40 minutes, and I let her show me the kitchen. Wolf range. Sub-zero fridge. Marble countertops she told me twice were Calcutta. And I let her tell me about her job in a way that made it sound like she was personally running the global economy. And I asked the questions she wanted me to ask. I said, wow, at the right times. I said, I had no idea at the right times. I let Wyatt watch his sister, because that was the deal we'd made, and it was not my deal to break. She served us dinner at a long marble table. She had ordered it in from a restaurant whose name she said with a particular emphasis, and the food was very good and very small. There were 3 courses. She talked through all of them. She told us about a colleague who was an idiot and a man she had briefly dated who was an idiot and a younger associate at her firm who was also an idiot but in a way she found endearing. She did not ask me a single question during dinner. Not one. She asked Wyatt about their mother, and she asked Wyatt about a cousin of theirs in Maine, and she asked Wyatt whether he'd been getting to the gym, and that was the question that made my husband finally put down his fork. "Verity," he said. "What?" "You haven't asked Coralie anything." "I have." "You haven't." "Not really." She rolled her eyes. She actually rolled them. She said, "Wyatt, don't be dramatic. Coralie and I are having a lovely time, aren't we, Coralie?" I looked at her over the rim of my wine glass. I said, "We're having the time you wanted us to have." There was a pause. She didn't quite understand what I meant. Her eyes did the flicker again, and this time it landed on my face and stayed there. "What does that mean?" she said. "It means I think we should probably go soon," I said. "Wyatt has an early morning." "Wyatt has an early morning. On a Sunday." "Yes." She set her fork down. "The thing about people like Verity is that they are not stupid, cruel, often, vain, always, but not stupid." She had registered in some animal part of her brain that the room had shifted. She just couldn't pinpoint how. "I feel like I've offended you somehow," she said. Her voice had a new little edge in it. "Have I done something?" "No," I said. "You've been very gracious." "Then what is it?" I looked at Wyatt. He was watching me. He gave me the smallest nod. The deal we'd made, to let her be herself, to let him see, that deal was complete. The look on his face was not anger. It was something older and sadder than anger. It was the look of a man who had just been told a thing he'd suspected for a long time and had hoped, against all available evidence, was not true. I said, "Verity, I'd like to tell you what I do for a living." She laughed. "Coralie, please, I didn't mean to make you feel—" "I'm the senior director of corporate strategy for a financial services holding company in Boston," I said. "I have 8 direct reports and a team of 43. I sit on the executive committee. My base salary is $320,000 a year. With bonus and equity, last year I made just over $600,000. We don't live in a little apartment. We live in a house in Brookline that I paid for in cash 2 years ago. Wyatt didn't know I was buying it until the day we moved in. He cried. He's a man who cries about real things. That's one of the reasons I married him." I took a sip of my wine. It really was very ordinary wine. I said I didn't tell you any of this earlier because Wyatt asked me not to. He wanted to see what you'd say, not what you'd say to a stranger, what you'd say to me when you thought I was beneath you. And what you said is what you always say. To him. To your mother, I think, sometimes. Definitely to that associate at your firm. You said it in a nicer voice tonight, but it was the same thing you've been saying for 38 years. He could have done more. He settled. "The simple life is sweet, but it's small. 2 ambitious people in a marriage can't work. You were telling my husband in front of me in the apartment you bought with money you earned that he had failed, and you thought I would nod along because you decided I was the kind of woman who would." She was very pale. The wine glass in her hand was shaking, slightly, and I felt something almost like sympathy. Almost. "I'm not going to ask you to apologize," I said. "I'm not going to ask you for anything. I just want to be very clear with you, Verity, about one thing. The next time you want to know what your brother chose, you can ask him. You can ask him to his face. He's right here. He's been right here for 38 years. And he's the most generous person I've ever known. And he is not small. And the life he built is not sweet. It's enormous. It's the entire shape of my life. And you have missed almost all of it because you were too busy telling yourself a story about which one of you mattered more." There was a very long silence. Wyatt put his hand on top of mine on the table. "Verity," said, finally. "I didn't know," I said. "He never said he shouldn't have had to." She looked at her brother. Really looked at him, I think, maybe for the first time in a long time. She said, "Wyatt." He said, "I'm not mad, Verity. You should be. I know, but I'm not. I'm just tired. We didn't stay for dessert. I helped clear the table. Old habits." And she didn't try to stop me. At the door, she stood there with her arms wrapped around herself like she was cold, and she said to me, "Coralie, could I call you sometime?" I said, "You can call your brother. If that goes well for a while, we'll see." She nodded. She did not cry. I gave her credit for that. We walked down the 4 flights of stairs, and on the second landing, Wyatt stopped and leaned his forehead against the wall, and I stood next to him and didn't say anything for a long time. Then he said, "Thank you." For what? For being who you are. For not being someone who needed to win that. "I did win it," I said. "I just won it quietly." He laughed. It was a wet laugh, half a sob. He said, "God, I love you." "I know." We walked the rest of the way down. Outside, the air had gotten colder. The cobblestones were slick, and Wyatt held my arm. The car was 3 blocks away because there's no parking on Beacon Hill on a Saturday night, and we walked slowly, and he held my mother's old leather satchel for me because the strap was bothering my shoulder. I want to tell you that Verity called the next week and apologized, and we are all close now, but the truth is more boring than that. She called Wyatt about a month later. They talked for an hour. Then she called him the next month and the next. She hasn't called me. She might, eventually. She might not. Wyatt sees her for lunch every 6 weeks now, and he comes home from those lunches quiet but not sad, and that's enough for me. The thing I learned from that night is something my mother could have told me when I was 9. People who need you to be smaller than them will tell you exactly who they are if you give them the chance. You don't have to perform for them. You don't have to fight them. You just have to sit there and let them talk, and at some point, if you are very lucky and very patient and very loved, the person sitting next to you will hear what they're saying, and they will choose you anyway, and that is the only victory that ever mattered. I drove home that night. Wyatt was too tired. I put my mother's bag on the passenger seat between us, and I drove us back to Brookline, to the house I bought him as a surprise, and we went to bed without talking, and in the morning he made me coffee like he always does, and that was the end of it. That was the whole thing. I've been thinking about that night for months now, and the part I keep coming back to isn't the moment I told Verity what I actually did for a living. It isn't even the look on her face when she realized. It's the 4 flights of stairs going down, with Wyatt's forehead against the wall on the second landing, and the way he said, "Thank you," like the word cost him something. Here is what I have learned, and I'm only saying it because I wish someone had said it to me when I was 22 and crying in a parking lot because a manager had called me ambitious like it was a slur. The people who need to be bigger than you will keep telling you they are bigger than you in 100 small ways, for as long as you let them. They will do it with rugs and handbags and stories about Copenhagen. They will do it with the word sweet. They will do it by not asking you a single question across an entire dinner. And the easiest thing in the world, the thing your whole body wants to do, is to fight back, to prove yourself, to set the table on fire. Don't. Or do it, sometimes, when it's earned, when someone you love is watching and needs to see. But understand that the fight is not the thing. The fight is just the punctuation at the end of a sentence you've already written with your life. I built what I built because my mother taught 4th grade for 31 years and never once apologized for the smallness of her paycheck, and because Mrs. Hagen could silence a room with one eyebrow, and because I learned young that loud people are almost always covering for something. None of that has anything to do with Verity. Verity didn't know I existed in any real sense until the night her brother stopped protecting her from herself. And the reason he stopped is not because I won an argument. It's because I'd spent 6 years being a person he could lean on, and that night on the second landing he finally leaned. You become the person you practice being, every day. In small rooms, when no one is watching. Verity practiced being the kind of woman who needed to be admired, and she got very, very good at it. And now she lives in a beautiful apartment with no one in it. I practiced being patient and quiet and useful, and I got a husband who cries when he opens the door of a house I bought him. That's not karma. I don't believe in karma in the cosmic sense, it's just cause and effect. You water what you water. You feed what you feed. And one day when it matters most, you find out exactly what kind of garden you've been growing. I am still growing mine, slowly, quietly, with no one watching, most days. And that I have decided is the whole point.